Hi, and welcome to the Caterpillar Cross Stitch YouTube channel. My name is Ford, and this week's episode is another one inspired by a viewer question. No matter what kind of scroll frame you have, I'm going to show you how to load your project into it. I've got quite a bit to cover today, so I'm going to keep the little spiel short, but please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave me a comment, especially if you have a question you'd like to see me answer. Now, this is a question that's actually been on my list to cover for quite a while now, but I was a little bit intimidated to cover it because there are quite a few different kinds of scroll frames out there, and I didn't have access to all of them. I finally went out and bought one of the ones that I didn't have today just to be able to show you how to use it. So let's get started with the one you're most likely to see frequently, especially if you find your scroll frame at an estate sale, a yard sale, or something like that. And those will look like this. You've got two dowels on either end, and those are what the project wrap around. And then you've got handles to apply tension to those on either side with these two bars to spread them apart. It'll also frequently have a hole in the side, which is for mounting it into a stand, either a lap or a table or a floor stand, but I don't have that for this one. The way that I use this actually flies in the face of convention. So first I'm going to show you the way that most people would teach you how to do it. First, you'll notice that on each dowel you have this ribbon of fabric that is stapled on there. And what you're supposed to do is take your project fabric, pin it onto these one at a time, and then using a sharp needle like an embroidery needle or a sewing sharp, you just sew your fabric to that piece of ribbon using a loose basting stitch. This doesn't need to be too tidy, and you don't need to make your stitches too dense or neat because this is all going to be temporary, and you're going to take it out when you're done with the project. And don't tie it off super securely when you're done because, as I said, you're going to have to take it off when you're done, and you're just making it harder for yourself if you tie a lot of really good knots there. So then once that's stitched on there, all you do is you roll your fabric around that dowel until your other end is in about the right position to be sewn on to the fabric on the other side. And so then that's how you're going to scroll your project. Now I've kind of done this upside down. You're probably going to want to work from the top of the project down. So you'll want to roll most of your fabric onto that bottom dowel. And you'll want to make sure that the ribbon that's on there is facing inward on both of them, so that when you're putting tension on it, you're pulling on the dowel to rotate rather than pulling outward on the staples, because you don't want the tension of your project to be pulling on those. So you do that on one side, roll most of the fabric, and then do it on the other side, and the side you do second will be the top of your project. Now it's important before you start this process to mark the middle of your project, because it'll be really hard to figure out once it's in the frame. I'm told that's the way it's always been done, and sometimes the old ways are the best ways, but sometimes innovation can lead to dramatic breakthroughs. So I'm going to show you how I use one of these that saves a lot of effort, both at the start and at the end of the project. So this is the way I'm going to show you how to do it. You'll notice that I have removed the stitches that I put in the previous attempt. I've got both dowels loaded into my scroll frame with the fabric ribbon that's on them running over the top into the center on both sides, so they're mirrors of one another. I'm going to take my project fabric and I'm going to stuff it up underneath that piece of ribbon on one side, and I'm going to hold my ribbon down against it. And I also want to make sure I straighten this out relative to the frame. And then I'll just roll that away from me a couple times. Now you're going to want to make sure that you have at least a couple of inches of extra fabric at the top and bottom especially. You're always going to need that with a scroll frame anyway, so there's just another reason it's important to give yourself the extra space on the edges that everybody recommends. So then I'm going to put this little spring clamp or a clip. You can use a clothespin or a peg or whatever you happen to have to hold that there for a minute. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'll just stuff my fabric up underneath that ribbon, right up against the staples that hold it in place. I will hold the ribbon in place and I will pull and wrap, keeping tension on that, and I will roll all of my fabric down to what's going to be the bottom side of my project. And then I can pull that tight, and I can tighten down the nuts that hold it in place. That will hold that dowel tight for me. Then on the other side, the one I did first, I can pinch the fabric against the dowel, remove my clip, and again, pull that dowel tight. Now the friction of the fabric against itself will keep that tight. And I'll just tighten down my set screws to hold the tension in those dowels, and that holds it nice and tight for me without having to sew it on there, which also means without having to cut it off afterwards. I've actually got it a little bit crooked, so I would probably pull that off and restart it if I were actually going to stitch this way. But this saves so much time and effort at the startup. Now with very large projects, you'll sometimes start to get looseness over on the sides, and you can get these little clip things with elastic. I couldn't find any to show you, that clip onto the sides and they wrap around the frame itself and pull that extra tension out. But with something this big, you wouldn't really need to worry about it. So those are 2 ways to load your project into what is probably the most traditional kind of scroll frame. If you find one in a bag at a thrift store, that's probably what it's going to be. But if you do find one at a bag in a thrift store, make sure it has all the pieces, because often it does not. It should have at least 1 pair of dowels with the ribbons on them. Usually you'll find multiples, because the only way to change the width of the frame is to change the width of these dowels. So you'll often find several of them in the bag. But make sure that they're in pairs, and make sure that you have the knobs in pairs. You'll notice mine don't actually match. It's because I bought one of these at a yard sale, and it had 2 different scroll frames in it, but neither one was complete. So I managed to make 1 complete scroll frame out of 2 incomplete ones. Don't forget to sign up for the Caterpillar Stitch Club newsletter email. You'll get updates about all the upcoming projects, stitch-alongs, retreats, socials, all of that kind of stuff. Plus you'll get an ebook with 10 free PDF cross-stitch patterns in it, which is worth £60. So hit the link in the description or in the first pinned comment on this video so that you don't miss out on any of that. Now, the next one I'm going to show you works a little bit differently. And this one does have a stand with it, but I've taken the legs off because I couldn't fit them in the frame to show you this demonstration. But this one you'll see has a pretty similar design. You've got retaining nuts on the end, you've got dowels that run through, and then you've got spreader bars here. And again, you change the length of the dowels in order to change the width of the frame. This one, though, also has holes at different lengths along the side spreaders so that you can make the distance between the dowels also shorter if your project is not this long. And a small note about assembly of one of these that I want to share with you that I learned the hard way with another product is that if your retaining nuts on the end have holes that go all the way through and there's some metal hardware on one side, that metal hardware should go on the outside of that retaining nut so that as you tighten that screw down, rather than pulling the nut, or rather than pulling the hardware out of the handle, it pulls the hardware into the handle. That allows you to pull it tighter without damaging and pulling apart the frame. The other thing about that is that the wood on wood surface has better grip and friction, so it will be less likely to come undone as you're using it and lose its tension. So just make sure that the little metal piece of hardware inside there is on the outside so the screw goes through the handle to the hardware and is pulling it into the joint instead of pulling it out. Now this one is a lot bigger, so it's harder for me to fit into the frame to show you, but you'll notice that the dowel looks a little bit different. It has this little groove or rabbet that runs down the side. And then it's got these little plastic clip thingies that have a hook on one side. And that little hook fits into that groove and then it snaps onto the frame. So the way you use this is just you take off however many of these little clip thingies you need in order to make your project fit. In the case of this piece I'm going to mount on here, you have to take all of them off. And you lay the project against the dowel. Now I would normally start with the outside edges. So that I can pull that tight. not wind up with any little bubbles as I go. And then snap on the rest of my little guides. You want to be careful that you don't pull the project away, because that's going to create a loose spot. And then once I've got those snapped around my project, I'll again pull this to rotate it, and that's how I'll load the scrolling. And then I'll do the same thing on the top side. And you'll notice that, I don't know if you can see that here, but the little plastic snap-on things, at least on this model, have a little arrow that tells you what direction you should be rolling that dowel. So that gives you the appropriate direction that it's meant to work. So those should face opposite directions on the top and bottom dowels of the frame. You can see that there. So the nice thing about this is that it doesn't require any sewing, it doesn't require any setup or tear down, it's just a really easy way to get it mounted into them. I have seen these style from a few different manufacturers. This one was a gift, so unfortunately I don't know the name of the brand other than the fact that it comes from a company in Ukraine. But I do know that Embroidery makes one a lot like this. Now there is another type of scroll frame that I've seen that I unfortunately didn't have a chance to get one to demonstrate for you. I believe it's called an easy stitch. And the way it works is it actually has Velcro, hook and loop tape, along the dowels. And then you just buy strips of stick-on Velcro that you stick on your project. So you stick it onto the project, you stick those two pieces of Velcro together, and then you just roll it up that way. Another fast and easy and zero tool setup way to load your fabric into a scroll frame. You could probably just buy adhesive Velcro tape and turn any scroll frame into one that works that way as well. I learned almost everything I know about cross-stitching actually from the social media groups that I'm in. You can learn so much by being in the Caterpillar Cross Stitch Facebook group and following the Instagram that I can't overstate their value. And if you're in the mood to try something new, check out Caterpillar Crochet. It's the same supportive community that you've come to love and beginner-friendly kits to help you get started in the new craft. Find us on Facebook or on Instagram to get started. Now, the last style I'm going to show you is one that you'll probably see a lot because it is the cheapest and it does have some advantages that recommend it over the other styles. And that is one that looks like this. It consists of two pieces of wood that have slits cut in them and then holes drilled in them, and 4 screws and 4 wing nuts. Now, if you're looking at this and thinking, boy, I could build that myself with just a little bit of lumber and the tools I have at home, you're probably right. The only part that would be hard would be cutting this groove, not even groove, cutting this slit down the center of the dowel, because that's what holds the project. So what we're going to do is we're going to open that up just a little bit, and we're going to take our piece of project fabric and we're going to slip that in to the slot. And then we probably want to slide it pretty far to the end of the slot that's in the dowel. And again, wrap that around a couple of times. Now what holds this is actually the friction that we can apply by tightening this wing nut down through that slot that's cut in the frame spreader. And that will allow us to pull against the other side. So then we'll just do the same thing over here. And you'll notice that I can slide that way up close to the side of my project so that my frames are not quite as far apart and I don't have as much empty space. So it makes this style of frame a bit more adaptable because you can change the width of it. Now, it is a little bit annoying to have these bars sticking out, but it's honestly kind of less annoying than having 5 or 6 different sets of bars that you use for different lengths. So then all we have to do is do the same thing on the other side. It'll be up to you whether you want to have all your extra length both on the same side or whether you want one to stick out on one side and the other to stick out on the other side. I think I'm going to leave all of my excess length on the same side of the fabric. And there we go. I've got my project loaded up into that one. Now, both the brilliance and the drawback of this design is that it traffics on the natural elasticity of the wood. Now, as you use that, the wood is actually going to naturally conform to the shape that you're bending it into. You'll notice that over here, we're bending these two sides of the slat of wood together in order to create the tension around that dowel. Eventually, the wood will just take that bend and it won't hold the friction anymore. So these are inexpensive, but they do also wear out over time just because of the way that they work. And one thing that I would caution you about when shopping for a scroll frame is that what kind of wood it's made from matters quite a lot. You'll want one that is made from hardwood. If the package does not say what kind of wood it's made from, it's probably made from a cheap softwood like pine, like this one that I just showed you. This one is not going to last very long because of the material that it's made from. You want something that's made from oak or ash or birch, or that says hardwood, especially if you're using one of these split dowel tension based ones. Now those are all the different ways of attaching a project to a scroll frame that I have encountered. If you've seen a different one, share it with us in the comments and we can all benefit from your wisdom. Other than that, that is all I have for you this week. I do want to thank you so much for watching. For Caterpillar Cross Stitch, my name is Ford, and I will see you next week.